I'm Dr. Martin Rutherford, certified functional medicine practitioner, chiropractor.
Dr. Randall Gates, board certified chiropractic neurologist, also a chiropractor.
For those of you who maybe have not tuned into us before, we have had a chronic pain practice develop kind of out of the dust based on putting our two disciplines together and using these two disciplines to continue to address a number of different types of chronic problems, chronic pain and chronic conditions. And so basically what we do every week is we share with you what we see. Dr. Gates does the research to share with you the literature that brought us to the types of treatments that he does, because he's doing all the treatment right now, and to hear things I hear on the intakes and the exams and things of that nature. And so we share that with you, and we share the references that also support what we're saying. So it's kind of an unusual venue. It seems like it's gotten more positive response than negative response. And so this week we're going to talk about MdDS syndrome, which you may know as I got off of the boat and I feel like I'm still on it. And it's something that I find is and it seems obvious to me, maybe because I'm around you, and I do all the histories, and I vicariously learned my neurology through Dr. Gates, and we've been together in our 8th year now. And it seems obvious to me, like the Debarquement syndrome, when it walks in the door. Yet it walks in the door because it doesn't seem to be diagnosed very well.
Yeah, because for these conditions in healthcare that don't have a single...
And I'm not trying to be critical, I'm just telling you what we see.
That don't have a single lab test, that don't have a single MRI finding. Just the way healthcare is going, doctors have less and less time with patients. Doctors are more under the pressure, so to speak, of the insurance companies, where they just got to, you need to vomit out the information on how you're feeling. They have to make a diagnosis, they have to run a test, and they have to move on. And the days where doctors had an hour with a patient every time to do an exam and a full history they're just simply gone, basically, in today's environment. Yeah. So that's probably why you see a lot of patients where there may be some ambiguity as whether they have MdDS or not.
And to add to that, the title of today's hangout is MdDS syndrome, understanding the dizziness. I had two patients in here yesterday with dizziness. And it's funny, as soon as a person starts trying to describe their imbalance, I know they have dizziness, because dizziness is difficult to describe. And usually the patient thinks that their descriptions are all over the place, but they seem to come out like it's just this feeling like I'm not stable, or maybe I don't have imbalance. Some people get nauseous, some people don't. And even in that history, it's fairly at least easy to delineate that it's generally primarily not the inner ear, and so this should be a pretty definitive presentation on MdDS syndrome. It's something that we see semi-regularly. We have really good success with it, and Doug Gates is going to share that with you. So an overview of the condition of MdDS syndrome, which amazingly, I've never had. I have a bad cerebellum. You're going to hear about the cerebellum.
You don't go on many cruise ships, though. So
I was on a boat. I was on a boat years ago up in Alaska. My only vacation to Alaska, fishing. And I was the only one on that boat that didn't get sick.
No kidding. Wow.
Yeah. But I did have the concept of just kind of having my legs go with the boat.
Okay, so you had land sickness for a little while afterwards.
No, while I was on the boat. In other words, I went with the waves like the whole time, and I don't know if that was it or not. Okay. I got off, and I was, maybe like for 30 seconds or a minute, and then I was fine. Everybody else was kind of like not having a good time.
Yeah.
And so yeah, it surprises me. So maybe you can explain that to me during the course of this, because we're going to talk a lot about cerebellum, I have a feeling here.
Yeah, so when we are on a ship, a cruise ship, let's say there's some rough swells or whatever it is, our inner ear is very activated. So the inner ear senses motion in 360 degrees, basically in each dimension. So we have the horizontal plane, we have what's referred to as the pitch plane and the roll plane. And then we also have a lot of what are termed translations. We translate up and down when you're on a ship, kind of like going in an elevator, and you may even have some side to side to a lesser degree. And so there's just a lot of vestibular activity that happens on a ship that doesn't normally happen when we're standing on land. And everyone has a different capacity for filtering that inner ear activity. And some people can filter it really well, and they have absolutely no problems when they're on a ship. You know, you watch Deadliest Catch or a show like that, and the waves are 40 feet, and these guys are out there working on the deck, and it just blows my mind for someone who does have a propensity for motion sickness. And then, you know, others are more like me, and they, you know, that you take a plane flight and you get sick. So there are different ends of the spectrum, so to speak. And genetics can certainly be involved for some people who have that propensity for motion sickness. But as it more pertains to Malday-Embarkment syndrome, more severe changes in the brain occur. So what they found is that for the MdDS sufferer, when you're on a ship and you come off the ship and your symptoms do not resolve for over a month, where you still feel as though you're moving, there's been a critical change in how your brainstem functions. In the brainstem, there's a mechanism that prolongs inner ear activity on each side, but that becomes imbalanced in the MdDS sufferer. So think like the left side is weak and the right side of your brainstem is just continuing to send these brainstem signal, or excuse me, inner ear signals. It's called velocity storage. You don't have to remember that, but just understand this concept that the inner ear activity gets amplified in one side of your brainstem and turned down on another side of the brainstem. So as a result of that, we get this continual brainstem activity of there being motion when there's not motion. And then that causes you to feel like you're moving. And frequently when you look at an MdDS sufferer, they'll actually, if you isolate them, and many of you may know this, like the person will move. I'll try not to do this too much because it'll probably make our viewers dizzy. But you'll see the person move in a certain plane. You may see their head do this. You may see them going back and forth, or like in a diagonal plane. All of that's really, really important because those are clues as to how the brainstem is amplifying these inner ear signals more on one side. And so that's very important. And we use what's referred to as video nystagmography goggles. They're called VNG goggles, where we put these goggles on you and we can see your eyes, and your eyes will actually do the same thing, or more, they'll do kind of opposite of your body motion. So if you're moving back this way, your eyes will go down, and then you'll hold the person's head still and you'll see the eyes going up and down. It's really, really cool. So it's cool because you can use this to rehabilitate the brainstem. So this concept is called neuroplasticity. It's where we can go in and we can actually strengthen certain parts of the brain that are not firing as well. So simply think of it, if your right brainstem is amplified and your lower brainstem, excuse me, your left brainstem is turned down relative to inner ear activity, well, can we turn up the left side and turn down the right side? And that's really the idea behind treatment for the MdDS sufferer. And so the research first came out using monkeys. They were doing certain types of, they're called full field visual stimuli, to simulate like if you're turning to the left or turning to the right, to like turn up one side of the brainstem. And then they started doing it with head motion. And then now new research is talking about how new brain imaging studies are finding, like with PET scans, that the fear center in the brain and the smell area of the brain are abnormally connected to the areas of the brain involved with vision and inner ear signals. And so we're seeing these abnormal connections that are not present in normal people who don't have MdDS. So with this, the researchers are trying to create new tools using electrical stimulation or magnets to try and correct these relationships. But the best research is really coming out, the most, well, really it's the best research with the longest outcomes on fixing this brainstem mechanism that I talked about, because that's really kind of the underlying cause, most likely, of anything going on up here. When I say up here, I mean like above the eyes, which is where, you know, we're talking about where these areas of the brain that deal with vision and vestibular inputs are involved. So that's kind of the new understanding, so to speak, for the MdDS sufferer Does that make sense? Anything?
So
think
you
I should
didn't mention the
clarify?
cerebellum.
Well, okay. So the cerebellum, the reason
Making me
why
look bad here.
the reason why one side of the brainstem probably becomes turned up or amplified is because the cerebellum is not filtering those inputs from the inner ear. So there are many different parts of your cerebellum. Your cerebellum is your balance center. Your cerebellum helps you to type on a keyboard. Your cerebellum helps you to reach out for a cup with a smooth motion. Your cerebellum helps you to kick a soccer ball without falling over. But there are other very specific parts of the cerebellum that are involved with inner ear activity. And I don't need to mention their names, but these parts that deal with inner ear activity really filter inner ear activity. So if you have one side, let's say both sides don't filter as well, but the right side is weaker, it's thought that maybe that is why one side of the brainstem becomes amplified in turning up this inner ear signal. It's really a cerebellar issue that caused the problem in the first place. So that's a big part of our rehab. I will also say that every MdDS sufferer that we have seen has had an autoimmune problem. I'm just putting that out there. So, but basically that's not talked about in the research because MdDS hasn't been studied that well. When I say that well, I mean, there's just a lot of new research on it and there's not even a lot of old research on it because it's kind of an esoteric dizziness condition, but we see a lot of it in our clinic. So every MdDS sufferer that I can recall that we've seen has had an autoimmune issue. Either they've had rheumatoid arthritis, they've had an autoimmune attack on their thyroid and they didn't know it because their thyroid tests were normal, but their immune counts, their thyroid were elevated, or they did have hypothyroidism, they weren't treated, or they had some other autoimmune issue. The new research is showing that patients with these autoimmune conditions can have cross-reactivity between immune cells to one part of their body and the cerebellum. That's the general point. So that's where we found that for long-term improvements with these issues, you have to really work with the person's immune system, get that calmed down so that these brain-related exercises can take effect.
He stole my whole thunder there. But not all of it, but to bring this down into practicality for those of you who may have dizziness or MdD syndrome, the question is, why do my doctors not know this? As Dr. Gates said, and I don't remember, I was trying to listen as closely as I can, but basically you get this, maybe you go to the ER because it's really bad. They do an MRI, they do a CAT scan, they don't see anything because they're looking for pathology there. They're looking for, is there something here that is insidious, pathological, it's going to kill this person, that's going to need a surgery. When that's not there, then they're sent to the ear doctor, and if you have MdD syndrome, if you're lucky, that's going to come up negative because they might see something else that they think it is in the inner ear and go after that, and then it doesn't work. But for most part, by the time people come here, they have this, and they're still thinking inner ear. In a lot of my consults, they're still thinking, I don't know, maybe it's just the rocks in the ear and things like that. But the symptoms of the cerebellum and that same side brainstem are so different from inner ear symptoms. And although you can get later dizziness from inner ear symptoms, inner ear, you're going to get like vertigo and things of that nature. And then later on you can get dizziness, but it's different. And so this is why your doctors generally don't do a good diagnosis on this. And Dr. Gates alluded to this in the very beginning. And then the other thing I think it's important relative to Dr. Gates is mentioning the autoimmunity is usually there. It may have been undiscovered, and it's part of like, why did I get this when the other three people didn't get this? And that's why it's unusual for me because I have all of those things and I didn't get it. But autoimmunity weakens the part of the brain that's supposed to be dampening this response, which is the cerebellum. Other things could be sugar abnormalities.
Possibly, I haven't seen that.
Stress hormones. Possibly. I'm asking now. Okay, these were my thoughts as I was listening. Certainly bad cerebellum. Dr. Gates also mentioned extensively autoimmunity and how about alcohol? I mean, they use the cerebellum for the drug test. Is there any connection there? I'm just looking.
That. Yeah.
Okay, and is there anything else? Concussions? Could that? I'm just trying to bring to the listener the practicalities of why they may have gotten this versus somebody else who doesn't.
Concussion possibly.
And why it's been missed. So I don't know if that and not always, but people who have car sickness, I have noticed in the histories that most of the people who come in with MdDS syndrome, maybe not all, I can't remember that clearly, but an awful lot already have a history of car sickness. Car sickness pretty much is cerebellar problems. So so that now you go on the ship, your cerebellum is already a little desynced, and in my simple brain, neurologically, I think it seems like from the histories that may be something that kind of sets you up to have this happen. And it is able to be improved. If there's an autoimmune problem there, it cannot be cured, but the rehab can bring you back to being normal, and then having the tools to stay that way. And if there's not an autoimmune problem involved, would you say it's correctable?
I think even if there is an autoimmune problem involved, I mean, it's
okay. Well, then
you can improve it considerably.
Okay, then I just look at autoimmunity as something that is there now, you know. So that's why I mentioned that. But in the end, most of our patients walk out here feeling pretty normal. I guess is probably the point. So I think that's all I wanted to say relative to maybe that practical aspect of that.
Okay, perfect. Well, I think that summarizes it. If you have any comments, we can take your personal questions, but if you have any comments, let us know on powerhealthtalk.com. You know, we do these videos for information, but a lot of patients ask us about being a patient, so I think you can access that information on powerhealthtalk.com. But again, we're doing this for patient information to kind of illuminate these conditions with the newest research that you're probably not going to hear about for a couple of years. So we hope this was helpful, and we'll see you next week.